What if policies make indivisible rights visible to all EU citizens? What if legislation makes rules more relevant to our common values? What if this makes people the priority of our law and policy making? All by using the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Since 2009, the Charter has served as an essential tool in turning EU citizens' rights into reality. As a result, we've advanced our laws and policies as the EU has adopted many initiatives to protect and promote people's rights. But now is a time to take them even further. With over 50 articles, the Charter is a legally binding, modern human rights catalogue that enriches existing entitlements. Its profound phrasing goes beyond many constitutional texts. It can inspire law and policymakers to develop more sustainable and better legislation. And where states, regions or municipalities are acting on matters where the EU has a say, the Charter turns from a soft aspiration into hard laws to the benefits of all of us. The Charter helps you to make indivisible rights visible, rules more relevant, people the priority. Apply the Charter, deliver our rights.
Good morning. First of all, warm thanks to Fundamental Rights Agency for preparing this video. It really sets a good tone for the day. It puts the Charter into spotlight. So, dear ministers, ambassadors, judges, lawyers, members of parliament, representatives of civil society, organizations and academia, and of course, right defenders. On behalf of the Commission and our co-organizers, Finnish Presidency and the Fundamental Rights Agency, I'm really happy to wish you warmly welcome to this conference, which marks the 10th anniversary of the Charter becoming legally binding. You are all what we like to call actors in the Charter's enforcement chain. You play a key role in making Charter a reality in people's lives. And today you will have the opportunity to together reflect on how to use Charter to its full potential. Today we put the Charter and the rights and values it enshrines really in the spotlight. And during the breaks, you can wander around and discover the work of Sylvia and Stefan, two artists who have taken the Charter to 10 German cities in the marketplaces, asking citizens to improve, or what their improvements would be to various articles of the Charter. I think this is a very nice and innovative way to raise citizens' awareness of the Charter. Sylvia and Stefan will be here present in the afternoon and present their work. We have also set a photo booth next door where you can take selfies of your favorite or in front of your favorite Charter right. And I would encourage you to participate in this and disseminate the pictures in your own networks. The hashtag for today is hashtag EU Charter. Over lunchtime, colleagues from the Commission and the agency will present also the Charter online tools, such as the European e-Justice Portal, Charterpedia, and European Fundamental Rights Information Systems. So the presentations will be held in English and take place in this room, so please feel free to attend that presentation. Please also note that the whole event will be web streamed and that interpretation is available from and to English, French, German, Italian and Polish from now until 12:15 and then again from 2:15 to 6:30. And now to the program. I would like to welcome Commissioner Věra Jourová. Commissioner Jourova has been working hard under the current Commission to promote and protect fundamental rights in the EU. And we are very happy that she will be continuing her work under the new Commission as Vice President for Values and Transparency. Please, Commissioner.
Thank you, Tiina. You just reminded me that, in fact, my favorite fundamental right is the right to be forgotten, which I will not manage by continuing in the Commission. So we will be happy to cooperate further in the next 5 years, I hope. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, cooperators in the field of human rights, Michael, Maya, Anna, I am really very honored to be today with you as we mark the 10th anniversary of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights becoming legally binding. The video just reminded us that we can achieve a lot if we do the things right, if we try hard. We can achieve something substantial. If we fail, we will fail everything. And I think that this is a very strong push for all of us to continue what we are doing and be courageous and be hardworking. The Charter itself is already a great achievement. With the Charter, we agreed on a set of shared values and fundamental rights that serve as a compass to guide our actions. The Charter as a symbol of our shared European identity, the knowledge that we all belong to a community of values where fundamental rights are respected, where democracy and the rule of law prevail. It also represents an important milestone in the development of the EU, the leap from what was essentially an economic union to one that puts its citizens at its heart. It might be easier to realize the value of the Charter if we recall the past. This November, we celebrate the anniversary of the Velvet Revolution in former Czechoslovakia and the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. These were acts not only symbolic of the collapse of the oppressive communist system in Eastern and Central Europe, but of the desire of the oppressed to be part of such a community of values. The Charter is the representation of freedoms we, on the east of the Iron Wall, fought for. But we have to be honest, the everyday life in Europe does not always reflect the ideal captured in the Charter. Every day, people, entire groups are discriminated against. We see laws that limit people's rights. We see technologies that make the application of fundamental rights very difficult. Too few Europeans know and understand their rights. Too many feel they remain on paper and don't apply in real life. So we have a duty to act and to change this. Before I outline some ideas of what I would like to do, it's important to understand where we came from and what happened over the last 10 years. Over the past decade, the Charter has led to a more coherent and comprehensive interpretation of fundamental rights across the EU. This included putting new rights forward. Take, for instance, already mentioned, right to be forgotten, interpreting the right to privacy in the digital age. This is now clearly part of our privacy rules set. But this also meant ensuring fundamental rights are protected in whatever initiative we take. From my work on this In the current Commission, I can tell you that we have collectively put a lot of efforts to ensure Charter compliance. This has not always been easy, particularly when preparing legislation in the field of migration or security, but the awareness about the Charter in the decision-making is a reality. What's more, the Court of Justice of the EU has been instrumental in developing a culture of fundamental rights within the institutions. I am sure you will hear more about this later from the best possible speaker, the President Lennartz. If I am well informed, he is coming this afternoon. So now we have a strong body of EU law that proactively promotes and protects citizens' rights. The new rules on data protection, gender equality, and on protecting whistleblowers and victims of crime are just a few examples. The last decade also witnessed the emergence of a vibrant scene of defenders of fundamental rights, such as national human rights institutions, equality bodies, ombudspersons, as well as civil society organizations and networks. They are crucial as our eyes and ears on the ground, and they are often the first instance to turn for the victims of fundamental rights abuses. There is, however, one important lesson. The general consensus in the EU around fundamental rights and values can never be taken for granted. The increased uncertainty of many Europeans over security, jobs, migration, climate change, or technological transformation create a fertile ground for autocrats and political extremists. They offer a false choice between security and rights. So I want to be clear on this. There will be no freedom and security if we sacrifice our rights. We have to fight this false premise and get better in showing to people that the foundation of security and prosperity are the values enshrined in the Charter. This is why, now more than ever, it is essential to make the benefits of the Charter clear for all. Fundamental rights matter in our societies because they put the individual in the center stage, and they are about recognizing and protecting that individual in his or her own way. We need to ensure that the principles, rights and values enshrined in the Charter are not perceived as empty promises, but rather that they become a reality for all. The clear message from the Eurobarometer survey was that our citizens want to know more about their rights and where to turn to if these rights are violated. Rights are important, but they also need to be effectively enforced. Many of you in this room are instrumental in bringing the Charter to life. You are all part of the Charter's enforcement chain, ensuring it has a real impact on people's lives by being applied effectively. It is not always easy to understand when and how the Charter applies. The rights enshrined in the Charter are not self-standing. They apply only for the implementation of EU law. That means that when citizens come to us with concerns over their rights, we often had to tell them that it is not within our remit to help them. We, of course, point them in the right direction, usually towards national institutions, but this kind of response can, of course, be frustrating for both sides, for those who come to us with hopes, but also for us who have to say, go somewhere else. But we are telling them with trust that at the national level, the complaints will be heard and solved. What we would like to achieve today is to find ways to use the Charter to its full potential and to make it more relevant. As I mentioned during my recent hearing before the European Parliament, in the new Commission mandate, I intend to revise the Charter strategy that was adopted 10 years ago. For this, I would gladly welcome your inputs and your ideas. Allow me share some initial thoughts with you of the areas where I would like to act. First, we have to continue putting the human dimension at the core of the EU's legislative and policy work. For example, with artificial intelligence or minimum wage, priorities announced already by President-elect. Secondly, I would like to improve the assessment of the state of play of fundamental rights. So far, we have done half of the job, looking at how it works at the EU level. But if we are to reap the benefits to the citizens, the key, I am afraid, is at the member state level. Third, the effective application of the rights. Once we understand where the problems we have to use all the tools at our disposal, be it legal or political, to ensure that the rights are there for everyone. We have to look at the whole enforcement chain, from the Commission through the courts to the human rights institutes, and strengthen the weaker links. Fourth, we have to evaluate the impact of current trends on the application of fundamental rights. There might be cases where more substantial guidance from our side might be needed. I think in particular about the digital world, as the last years show big challenges when it comes to upholding the basic rights online, including dignity, freedom of expression, or even free elections. Last but not least, awareness of rights. Let me stress of rights rather than only of the Charter itself. People have to know what's in the book, not only the cover, if we want them to effectively use it. One key objective of the new strategy should be to enhance support for those whose rights that are violated and to help them understand where they can turn to help and what they can do. Of course, these are just some initial thoughts, and I hope this event and many others will help us to find the best way forward. We will do this in an inclusive way, involving all key actors at the national and European level in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, now at the beginning of a new EU policy cycle is the perfect moment to refocus our efforts and to put the Charter at the center of our action. You, the actors of change, are integral and, as I said before, very instrumental to this. I wish you a successful conference and thank you ahead for your inputs for our future work, especially on the strategy for implementing the Charter better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now I would like to invite Anna-Maja HENRIKSSON, who is the Minister of Justice in Finland. She is a strong proponent of fundamental rights, and I'm very pleased to have been able to serve for her during her previous mandate as a Minister of Justice in Finland. She taught me something, and I think her mother had taught it to her, and that is, when you have a reason to celebrate, do it. And I think we are here, we have a reason, we have the 10 years where the Charter has been legally binding, but I think we can also celebrate the future work that we are doing. Please, Anna-Maja.
Thank you, Tiina, for your kind words. And good morning, everyone. Vice President-designate Jourova, dear Vera, Director of Flattery, dear Michael, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to be here today with you to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Fundamental Rights Charter as a legally binding document. The fact that the anniversary falls during Finland's presidency of the Council of the EU is a pleasant coincidence. Promoting fundamental rights has been a long-standing priority of Finland's EU policy. Fundamental rights are also an important part of the Finnish presidency program. And on behalf of the Finnish presidency, I'm happy to wish you all warmly welcome to this conference. Respect for our common values is the backbone of the EU. This has been highlighted throughout Finland's presidency. Democracy, the rule of law, and the fundamental rights, the famous tripod, are interlinked and interdependent. If one is missing, the whole tripod falls down. And we are not talking about luxury items that people living in the EU enjoy only on good days, but about the very foundations of our societies. This is important to keep in mind when talking about fundamental rights. Their promotion and protection is even more essential in turbulent times. We encounter new challenges, such as the increase of online hate speech. This requires robust action by all of us, both at the national and the EU level. Freedom of speech is a precondition for a democratic society. Hate speech hampers the full realization of rights, and it is not protected by the freedom of speech. On the contrary, it can limit the access to information and the principle of non-discrimination. And we know that hate speech may also, in extreme cases, lead to hate crime. Dear guests, at the EU level, the Charter is our core fundamental rights instrument, the EU's own Bill of Rights. It is still a relatively young fundamental rights instrument, at least if compared to UN conventions or the European Convention on Human Rights. However, it's becoming more widely used and known. I think that it's finally gaining the role it deserves. Yet more needs to be done to reach its full potential and to fully realize the rights enshrined in the Charter. Therefore, it's important to enhance the use of the Charter at the national level. As a member of the Swedish-speaking minority in Finland, I know how important fundamental rights are to all of us. Today we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Charter becoming legally binding upon the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty in 2009. Next year, we will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Charter since it was drafted by the European Convention and solemnly proclaimed in 2000. We have colleagues among us who have followed the entire life cycle of the Charter so far. We have witnessed great developments regarding Charter awareness at the national level, resulting in its increased use. And yet, there are still people in the European Union who have never even heard about the Charter. This means we all have a role to play in the enforcement of the Charter. Action is needed at both the EU level as well as the national level. Here I would like to mention the important set of Council conclusions on the 10th anniversary of the Charter, adopted on the 7th of October this year. The conclusions highlight the importance of the Charter's use by all relevant actors. In particular, the conclusions make an explicit mention of the Council itself, alongside with Member States, the Commission, the Fundamental Rights Agency, national human rights institutions, and other bodies as relevant actors in applying the Charter. That covers many of us here today. The role of the courts, both at the European as well as at the national level, is crucial. The conclusions underline the importance of the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union and the growing role played by national courts in securing the effectiveness of the Charter. In addition, I would like to highlight the important role of national parliaments and that of the academia. Charter-compliant legislation is in the hands of the parliaments. The academia can help in both ensuring that new lawyers are familiar with the Charter as well as providing up-to-date legal research on the Charter. The Council conclusions on the Charter include a number of concrete measures by which we can enhance implementation of the Charter. Vice President-designate Jourova has already mentioned some of them here today. The Commission's Charter strategy is of particular importance, and we welcome the Commission's efforts on this. I'm also happy about the introduction of an annual Charter exchange at the expert level at the Working Party on Fundamental Rights, Citizens' Rights and Free Movement of Persons. This kind of sharing of best practices between the Member States on the use of the Charter is extremely important. Ladies and gentlemen, all branches of the government are needed: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. They each have their own role, but fundamental rights are nevertheless important in all of them. The use of public power is by nature fundamental rights sensitive. I would like to share with you some of our experiences in Finland in ensuring Charter compliance in legislation and in public administration. The Finnish system assesses the constitutionality of proposed legal acts beforehand. The assessment includes compliance with our constitution, but also with Finland's international human rights obligations. Law drafters are given guidance on how to take fundamental and human rights in consideration when drafting new legislation. At the government level, the Chancellor of Justice oversees the legality of government action, including law proposals. At the Finnish Parliament, the Constitutional Law Committee considers law proposals from the perspective of the Constitution, but also with respect to other fundamental and human rights obligations. The Parliament has to take the views of the committee into consideration. All these steps aim at ensuring that all pieces of legislation are in line with fundamental and human rights, including the Charter. However, we also need the possibility for ex-post assessment, in particular by the courts in individual cases. All members of the legal family need to be aware of the Charter rights and their impact on national legislation. The role of legal practitioners is particularly important. We have had good experiences from the Charter-specific training that we have provided to civil servants. In January, the Ministry of Justice organized a one-day training for government officials on the Charter with particular emphasis on data protection. We received extremely positive feedback and requests for more training on EU fundamental rights. In preparation for the EU presidency, we have also trained our own EU staff at the permanent representation here in Brussels on the Charter in good cooperation with the Council Secretariat and the Fundamental Rights Agency. Dear friends, with these positive notes, I would like to finish my speech by underlining the need to be pragmatic. The Charter may still need support from its whole enforcement chain in order to be fully integrated in all relevant acts and activities, but this support does not need to be rocket science. We need better awareness and we need concrete tools. The conference today will provide both. In addition, this is an important opportunity for the key players at the EU level to come together and discuss how to ensure that the crown jewel of the EU legislation, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, gets the attention it deserves. This policy cycle with the new Commission is an opportune time to look for new initiatives. I'm very much looking forward to working with the new Commission in promoting fundamental rights, and I'm confident that this task is in good hands. Let's continue working together to further enhance Charter implementation. Finland will be a part of these efforts also after our EU presidency, and together we can develop a culture of fundamental rights across the Union. Last but not least, I would like to thank the Commission and the Fundamental Rights Agency for the excellent cooperation in the preparations of this joint conference. And you will hear a number of interesting presentations and hear a number of interesting discussions and also take part in it today. And I wish you all a very good and fruitful conference. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
And now I would like to invite the third speaker of this introductory session to join me, Michael O'Flaherty. Michael is really the face and the voice of the European Agency of Fundamental Rights, and we have been joining forces to work together to develop a culture of fundamental rights in the EU. And the data that the agency provides on the situation of fundamental rights on the ground is really the key to our both legislative and policy work at the European national level. And I'm extremely happy that we have been able to work on for this conference together. So please, Michael.
Tiina, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Minister, Commissioner, ambassadors, judges, dear colleagues, let me join in welcoming you warmly today. It has been such a great pleasure to work with the Commission and with the Finnish Presidency to pull together today's event, and we're honored that so many of you are here with us. I read the participants list earlier this morning, and I was both deeply impressed and daunted by the expertise and the experience that has been gathered here for today's discussions. Dear friends, when I was applying for this job, I spent a bit of time in the European Parliament, a lot of it just hanging around. And on one of those visits, on the 3rd floor, I came across a display case, which rather impressed me. It was a display case containing one of the original signed versions of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. However, on close inspection, I was horrified, because as those of you who will have seen the case will know, the Charter was quite literally disappearing. It was under a heavy beam of sunlight, and the ink was fading by the day. Now, I can't help but think that that experience of seeing that document in the Parliament had something to say to today. Something to say, if not about an ever more invisible charter, but at least of a charter that is not sufficiently visible in our work and in our societies. And today then can be acknowledged as a day of not just celebration of 10 years, it's certainly that, but also a wake-up call to reinvigorate our attention to the focus on the Charter. But it's useful just to take a minute before looking at what we need to do to reflect on what the Charter itself is. The Minister just now described it as a crown jewel. That's, I think, a beautiful way to put it. I was going to say Magna Carta, but it's the same point. It is an extraordinary human rights tour de force. And ultimately, it's not about law, it's about people. It's about everybody within the European Union. It's about those migrants that we're so worried about currently on the Greek islands. It's about the Roma in villages across Europe who go to bed hungry. It's about our older relatives suffering inappropriate treatment in nursing homes across our societies. It's about all of us in the protection of our personal data. And as the Charter seeks to deliver for all of us, it does so in ways that are truly notable. In the first place, we must never forget the status of the Charter. Unlike human rights treaties, transnational human rights treaties, the Charter is supranational, meaning it has domestic effect when EU law applies in our parliaments and in our courtrooms. With that domestic effect, it's also extremely interesting to acknowledge the extent to which the guarantees in the Charter go beyond the guarantees we find in many of our national constitutions. We did a study last year on exactly this question, and we were rather taken aback by the extent to which the Charter delivered in many ways that were neglected or not addressed in national constitutions. And third, in terms of the power of this instrument, it does what typically was not achieved especially well in the negotiation of human rights treaties, in that it brings together civil and political together with economic, social and cultural rights. And finally, and indeed going back to that point about its comparison to constitutional rights, it's a very modern catalogue of fundamental rights. Just to take a few examples, it contains a right of good administration. You won't find that in other human rights instruments. Its guarantees for the administration of justice are far stronger than those you'll find in the human rights treaties. It contains an explicit protection of personal data. It's the only human rights instrument with an explicit right to asylum. It contains the highly innovative right to conduct a business and explicit consumer protection rights. But how well are we doing? I would like to dwell, if I may, and complement what we've heard from the Minister and the Commissioner. I would like to focus on the national level. It's something we're following constantly in the Fundamental Rights Agency, year by year, examining the impact of the Charter and its engagement by key professional groups, above all judges and lawyers. And what we've mapped there over the years is a modest growth in its use, in its invocation, in its application at the national level. But let's be honest, from a rather low base. We don't have anything like the level of engagement that we would want to see. And we see also, particularly in terms of its use in courts, that while sometimes the use is smart and clever, innovative and impactful, on other occasions it's superficial or even in some cases mistaken. Why is that? Why do the mistakes sometimes get made? Why is the level of use so low? Well, we know from repeated questioning of the relevant professionals that it comes back time and time again to issues of low levels of knowledge of the Charter and sincere uncertainty about its scope of application. For example, there's confusion about the relative status of its rights and its principles. And of course, there's always the issue of when a matter is actually one of EU competence or not. Turning from the courts to parliaments, again here I'm afraid we don't have much to show. The Finnish superb good practice that we heard about from the Minister is unfortunately an exceedingly rare good practice. It's not replicated in many EU member states. Moving from Parliament to human rights, civil society and national human rights institutions, today the Fundamental Rights Agency is publishing a paper for this conference drawing findings from an engagement with civil society, with NHRIs, to test their levels of awareness and use. And these findings more or less replicate the findings in other sectors. Just 1 in 4, 25%, of the respondent organisations invoke the Charter periodically in their work. 1 in 10 have never invoked the Charter in any aspect of their work. So again, a job to be done with civil society. We of course also identified some really interesting good practice within civil society and national human rights institutions. For example, the Czech Public Defender of Rights repeatedly invokes the Charter on behalf of individual rights holders. And one last point about civil society is what they had to tell us about government. We asked civil society and NHRIs to tell us about national action planning by governments in their country for promotion of the Charter, and they told us they were not aware of any such action plan. And finally, there's the issue of the levels of awareness in the general public. Now, I agree with previous speakers that these figures are very low and they need to be improved, but to be honest with you, I'm not massively concerned right now. The Charter, as we heard this morning, is a new instrument. It's just a decade in force as a legal binding document. And I'm not sure anybody here can think back to 1963, but that was the 10th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights. And I wonder how many people knew about the European Convention in 1963. So we have time. And I believe that as the professional groups at the front line grow in awareness of, use of the instrument, it'll become better known in our societies. And now, before turning in conclusion to some specific action points, please allow me a word on the particular role of the European Court of Justice. It's important from the outset today to acknowledge that the ECJ is a primary agent, the crucial agent for building up the impact and the use of the Charter also at the national level. And I would suggest to you this morning that we here in the European Union can be proud of the European Court of Justice. It has demonstrated judicial rigour firmly grounded in human and fundamental rights. And it's a very elegant coincidence, to use the Minister's word, it's an elegant coincidence that today is the 60th anniversary of the delivery by the court of the Stander judgment, which held that, and I quote, "Fundamental human rights are enshrined in the general principles of community law and are protected by the court." And in the 60 years since Stander, the court has persistently, insistently built up its jurisprudence, its acquis in the area of human and fundamental rights, including with regard to the Charter. And to evidence the extent to which the court engages the Charter, just take one among so many possible figures. In 2013, there were 100 references to the Charter in judgments of the court. In 2018, that figure had risen to an astonishing 350. And now, let me, in conclusion, turn to some specific action points. But before doing so, I would have to say I couldn't help but be deeply impressed by what Commissioner Jourová said to us this morning. She laid out a broad, big picture action plan for embedding human and fundamental rights at the heart of our societies. I want to tell you, Commissioner, that you will have the unstinting 100% support of the Fundamental Rights Agency in delivering on this fantastic vision. And what I will say now are narrow points embedded in that much larger story. The Fundamental Rights Agency today would call on 3 initiatives to deliver better impact of the Charter at the national level. In the first place, we would ask our governments of our member states to become champions of the Charter. Let's be frank, we don't have too many national level governmental champions of the Charter at the present time. I make that call in the particular context of Article 51 of the Charter, which calls on member states and the other duty bearers to respect and to promote, and to protect rather, but also to promote the Charter. And it's in the spirit of promoting the Charter, whether that call for promotion is a legal duty or not, in the spirit of that call that member states develop those action plans I referred to earlier, bringing together all of the national energy to make the difference. Secondly, we would ask that more attention be given to training at the national level on the use of the Charter. And let me say at the outset here, of course, that we deeply appreciate the persistent leadership of the Commission in seeking to promote a far higher level of training and awareness raising. And I applaud the achievements of the European Judicial Training Network in that regard. But I think everybody would agree that we still have a long way to go at the national level in embedding the Charter in our academic and our professional curricula. And third and finally, we at the Fundamental Rights Agency would call for a better use of all of the Charter. Typically, it's engaged with regard to civil and political rights. 90% of the invocations of the Charter in the European Court of Justice in 2018 refer to civil and political rights, just 10% to the area of socio-economic justice. And above all now, as we struggle with rising levels of inequality in European society, now is a moment to breathe more and better life into the full breadth of the Charter, including in this area of socio-economic rights. And it's in the spirit of that broadening of our engagement that I'm so very pleased to inform you that this morning the heads of all of the EU agencies in the field of justice and home affairs have come together to adopt a declaration to the effect that they will embed the Charter across every aspect of all of their work. And so, dear friends, as we all go forward together in our work of promoting the Charter, please count on the continued support of the Fundamental Rights Agency. We will deliver that in 2 ways. In the first place, we will continue to develop and publish discrete tools to assist you in this endeavour. Our annual report will continue to have a dedicated focus chapter every year on the application of the Charter across the member states. We have published this year country fact sheets, which bed down the application of the Charter for each member state in the particular constitutional context of it. Third, last year we published a handbook for lawmakers on how to apply the Charter in their work. And frankly, the handbook is transferable from lawmakers to judges and to all other legal practitioners. We have now for a number of years, and we will continue to maintain and improve the so-called Charterpedia, which is an online resource of every imaginable judgment finding, a piece of academic writing with regard to the application of the Charter. And today, we're publishing 2 new tools. One of those is charmingly called the Charter Box. And the Charter Box is a tool targeted specifically to members of the European Parliament. It's being delivered to them today, and it contains all of the tools, the equipment, the materials that we believe that they need in order to embed the Charter across all of their work. And secondly and finally, in terms of new tools, today we will launch a new instrument called the European Fundamental Rights Information System, so-called EFRIS. EFRIS is an online resource which, for the first time ever globally, will bring together all of the findings of all of the international monitoring bodies in the human rights field, country by country, right by right, and the EFRIS is organised according to the chapters and the categories of the Charter. Secondly and finally, in terms of how we will support you, we will continue to ensure that the Charter informs everything that we do. The Charter is our Grundnorm. It is the legal base on which, from which we start all of our research and our technical assistance activities. It is also increasingly the heart of our programs of cooperation with civil society, with national human rights institutions, with governments, indeed, and with equality bodies. And so, dear friends, thank you very much for your attention this morning. Let me go back in absolute conclusion to the display box at the Parliament. It's not there anymore. It was taken away at some point last year. It was taken away so that the document itself could be restored. Let's find in that also an image for today. Today is an opportunity for all of us to restore ourselves, to restore our passion for, our commitment to the Charter of Fundamental Rights, to ensure that it becomes what its drafters dreamt of, the beating heart of our European project. Thank you.